With regard to India, I think he's made it very personal because he mixed up the tariff issue and the Russian issue. Since he was not getting what he wanted on tariffs, he has upped the pressure on India by raising the specter of imposing additional tariffs because we buy Russian oil in order to force us to make the concessions he wants.
So it's very vindictive what Trump is doing. And as you said earlier, it's a deliberate attempt to try and break India's back, to break India's resolve.
Yes, of course. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I think he's totally excluding the fact that this will leave a lasting damage on the attitudes that the Indian public and the policymakers will have with regard to how deep they should deepen, how much they should go ahead and deepen their ties with the United States. The trust factor has been hit very hard, and we'll have to think immediately. We can't de-link ourselves from the United States, but there will be, I think, policy choices which will have in mind that we must not over-rely on the United States. I would say that at the level of the government, we should keep our doors of dialogue open. As you know, a US trade delegation led by their deputy USTR is coming this month to India. We should continue the trade talks, and we should say that we are willing to have a mutually beneficial, balanced and a fair trade agreement, and we made some progress and we are willing to make more progress, but there are no-go areas on which we will not yield, come what may. And therefore the Americans have to accept that. And the rhetoric at the level of our government should be measured, but our media, our civil society, our international relations expert, they should let America have it, that they should know that the public opinion is highly agitated, and if we can, the government should actually leverage India's public opinion to send a message to the American policymakers through their embassy here, through the Western media, that the United States is losing a lot of ground in India with the Indian public. In a democratic country, this is very important.
But you're making a very important distinction, if I've understood you correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong. The government should use public opinion, the media, policy experts, as you said, to hit America hard. But the government itself should keep the door open, go ahead with the negotiations that are intended or planned for the end of this month. And you're also, I take it, suggesting that we should not retaliate by jacking up our own tariffs against American goods in the interim. You're not suggesting that?
In the interim, no. We have to see how it pans out because the trade negotiations are not over. If at the end of whatever round of discussions that we plan to have, if we find that there is a total block and we can't move further, then yes.
Do you see the situation improving during the next 3.5 years of Trump's presidency? Or do you fear that what started badly is going to steadily deteriorate?
Difficult to say, but I would say that going back to the kind of level of confidence and personal bonhomie and personal equation that Prime Minister had with Trump, and the general feeling in India that despite his idiosyncrasies, Trump was good for India, better for India than Biden was. I think that phase is over. That phase is over, and we'll have a difficult relationship. One doesn't know if Trump gets weakened, whether he'll become even more unpredictable and more rash in his thinking and policies. So the jury is out, but I would generally agree that the next 3.5 years are not going to be easy for us.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How serious and worrying is the trade dispute between India and the United States? How much damage could it do to the Indian economy? But beyond that, is this simply a trade dispute, or is it also an attempt to threaten India's core interests and constrain its strategic autonomy? In fact, are we seeing an across-the-board deterioration in Indo-US relations? And finally, how should we respond to this situation? Those are the key issues I shall discuss today with India's former Foreign Secretary, former Ambassador to Russia and France, and the present Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, Kanwal Sibal. Kanwal Sibal, before we discuss how India should respond to President Trump, both in terms of tariffs and the deteriorating relationship between the two countries, let's first focus on how serious the situation is. Ajay Srivastav, the founder of the Global Trade Research Initiative, says that with 25% tariffs, India's exports to the USA could fall by 30% in the current financial year, collapsing from $86 billion to just $60 billion. The worst affected areas would be labor-intensive ones like shrimps, garments, textiles, jewelry. And all of that means job losses in India. Shamsadan, one of your successors as Foreign Secretary, says the tariffs could reduce India's GDP growth by 2%. But all of that is with tariffs at 25%. Last night, the tariffs have increased to 50%, which means that the damage could be twice as bad. Would you accept this is a pretty serious hit?
Yes, it is. And that's the entire purpose of Trump imposing these very high tariffs in order to bend India's will and get his way, as he has done with Japan, and even more so with the European Union. And probably thinks that if he can break their backs, certainly he can try and get what he wants from India. Though, mind you, when it comes to China, where the equations are a bit different, and China does have a capacity to hit back, he's being very careful. And even the 10% base tariff has yet not been applied to China and has been postponed. So it's a power game that's going on, totally unprincipled on the part of the Americans. And Trump believes that he can push India into conceding what he really wants, but I'm not sure that he will succeed in this. And I think the facts and figures that you've given about how much damage it will do to our economy. I've seen some different figures which do not match these, though I'm not an expert in these matters and I don't want to get into a debate on this. I saw that it might affect about 0.5% of our GDP, but more than that, a large part of India's exports to the United States, whether it is electronics, whether it's pharmaceuticals, including iPhones. If you look at what he has issued as a directive,
actually,
a lot of areas have been omitted.
Can I interrupt and say all of that has been taken into account by Ajay Srivastav? He's well aware that something like 55% of India's exports may not be affected initially. Even thereafter, he's calculated that the hit will be 26 billion in this current financial year alone. To use the evocative phrase you used a moment ago, Trump's intention is to break India's back.
Yeah. There is a view, and a well-considered view by people who've been studying Trump and his policies and his conduct and his behavior, that he does all this, but he's quite capable of stepping back. Moment he feels that things are getting out of hand, he's not getting his way, there is resistance, and there's a cost to pay, he can change tack. These are his negotiating tactics. So I'm not sure whether all the figures that you mentioned, which may have validity, whether actually this will happen in the weeks ahead.
Absolutely. I take your point that Trump is mercurial, Trump can change his mind, Trump can do a U-turn. But until he does, Let's continue with the situation that we face today. The second important situation that emerges is that Trump's decision to impose 25% tariffs because India imports Russian oil is widely interpreted as a threat to India's core interests and its policy of strategic autonomy. What Trump is doing is attempting to veto who we trade with and what we buy. Again, that is surely a serious concern from our point of view.
Yes, of course. Of course. It is a kind of a neo-colonial attitude that Trump has, as if India has to be reduced to a semi-colonial status, and India cannot have an independent foreign policy, and its external relations have to be guided by the wishes and preferences and priorities of the United States and its foreign policy goals. Now, with regard to Russia, as you know, the latest is that Trump, of course, you never know. Trump says one thing one day, another thing another day. That very, very shortly, maybe in a week's time, he's going to meet Putin. Witkoff, his emissary, has gone and met Putin. They had a couple of hours talk. And Ushakov, who is a very serious advisor, senior advisor of Putin, has said that the talks were constructive. Now, if that happens, then there'll be no justification for imposing secondary tariffs.
But we
Because these
don't know
secondary
about that
tariffs
as yet, and we may not know about that till Friday at the earliest, because Witkoff has already said that he will only reveal what he discussed with Putin once he's briefed Trump, and that is yet to happen.
True.
The other
True.
problem is that we also have a fairly progressive adversarial deterioration in the relationship. Increasingly, the two countries are becoming adversarial rather than allies. Trump's repeated insistence that he brokered the ceasefire after Operation Sindoor is one point that rankles. His improving relations with Pakistan is another. His attack on BRICS is a third. And the question marks that he himself has raised about the future of Quad and America's Indo-Pacific strategy are a fourth. All of this, again, I take it, is very disturbing for India.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. He's unraveling all the progress that has been made in our relations with the United States ever since the nuclear deal. Even with the Democratic administration, we had a lot of underlying issues which were problematic for us. But nevertheless, they had a certain geopolitical vision of the role of India and how it can help the United States in achieving its goal of remaining a leading power in the world. And not only that, even in terms of what they want to do in the technology area, they recognize the importance of India's contribution to that. And hence you had the ICET initiatives and everything else. But this man has no geopolitical vision. He thinks the world is a real estate issue. I mean, look at his attitude on Gaza. Throw out millions of people and convert it into a Riviera. He has an extremely simplistic, business-like mind of a property dealer, and that's where the problem is. Now,
and underlying that, I presume, is the fact that what's missing between Biden on the one hand and Trump on the other is a sense of empathy, sympathy, support for India. The concern that we want to build India is missing with Trump. It was very present with Biden.
But this is also, you see, this again is very puzzling, because within 20 days or something of his taking over, he accepted a visit by our Prime Minister. And mind you, contrary to what the Economist has said, I can guarantee you that he treated our Prime Minister with great respect. And not only that, a very substantive joint statement was issued. But somewhere down the line, something happened, whatever it is. Maybe his ego was terribly hurt, that he claimed that he had brokered the ceasefire and he wanted 4 or 5 Nobel prizes for all the efforts he has made globally to usher in peace in various regions. And India wouldn't give him that credit. Now, he's a very narcissistic man, an egomaniac. And this is the reason maybe he's taken it very personally, and he's made the whole relationship with India very personal. And he's also using pressure points.
Let's for a moment, Kanwal Sibal, focus on what he's done with regard to oil, because in a very real sense, that feels like the most vindictive of moves of all. On the issue of Russian oil, the MEA, that's our Ministry of External Affairs, has issued a statement to say that America was the country that under Biden encouraged India to buy Russian oil. And this is what Eric Garcetti, the American ambassador in Delhi, said in May 2024. Actually, India, brought Russian oil because we, the United States, wanted somebody to buy Russian oil at a price cap. Because as a commodity, we didn't want oil prices going up, and they fulfilled that. Trump is deliberately ignoring what Biden encouraged India to do, and instead he's blaming us for doing it.
Yes, but those facts still remain on the ground, in the sense that if Russian oil with 3 million tons or whatever goes out of the market, the oil prices will shoot up. They can go up to $150 a barrel, maybe 200, God knows what. And it'll hurt the Americans as much because the price for the American consumers at the pump will go up and it'll have inflationary effects. These are the concerns that Biden had when Garcetti made that statement, because in an election year, they didn't want the US consumer to suffer. And this is going to happen even now if the prices shoot up because Trump has this approach of sanctioning, imposing secondary sanctions on all those who are buying Russian oil. Actually, we are victims of his inability to strike a quick deal with Russia. If he had been able to do so, remember he said he'd do it in 2 days, then it got extended to 3 months, then God knows what, and he keeps prolonging the whole issue. Now we are being made victims of his approach to Russia, which is based on quick deals. Now the issue in Ukraine cannot be resolved on the
Absolutely,
basis
but
of a
let's
deal.
not get lost in Ukraine. Let's come back to Trump versus India, because there's a second aspect to it, which is his hypocrisy. The MEA in their statement actually hinted very clearly at his hypocrisy. America continues to import palladium, uranium hexafluoride, fertilizers, and chemicals from Russia. And the Indian Express on the 6th pointed out that in the last 6 months, the amount imported has increased substantially compared to just last year. So if America can import from Russia, why can't India?
You're right. But this is the question which Trump won't answer. Remember, he was posed a question by an Indian journalist that you are importing uranium and whatever palladium from Russia, and he said, "Well, I don't know about that. I'll look into this." Of course, he knows about that. Of course, he knows about that. But the point is, he feels that this is something which he can impose, threaten India with, and get his way, so that he can announce to his MAGA base that now he succeeded with India, the tariff king, and he has broken their will, and they have opened their market to us, and we will rake in millions and billions. This is the kind of language he uses. This is what his ploy is, but he's actually underestimating the degree of India's resistance. And I saw Prime Minister's statement.
I'll come to how India should respond in a moment's time. I'm deliberately delaying that for now because I want to point to a second double standard in what Trump is doing. So far, he has not threatened China with tariffs or penalties for importing Russian oil, or for that matter, even importing Iranian oil. And Iranian oil, as you know, is specifically sanctioned. Russian oil is not sanctioned. That's being the case. China is the largest importer of Russian oil. He hasn't sanctioned them. Turkey is the third largest importer of Russian oil. He hasn't sanctioned Turkey. His wrath is single-mindedly focused on Delhi.
Well, a couple of things. One is it's not only Turkey and other countries who are importing oil, but Japan is importing a lot of oil from Russia, and so is the European Union, including particularly Hungary and Slovakia, and they are NATO members. So it's totally inconsistent, his whole approach and his whole thinking. Now, with regard to India, I think he's made it very personal because he mixed up the tariff issue and the Russian issue. Since he was not getting what he wanted on tariffs, he has upped the pressure on India by raising the specter of imposing additional tariffs because we buy Russian oil, in order to force us to make the concessions he wants, because the dairy sector and the agricultural sector, those lobbies in the United States are pressing him. And as you know, American foreign policy is largely made by lobbying interests in the United States. There may be some broad vision of maintaining America's supremacy, but when it comes to these kind of issues, especially economic dominance, it is very, very, very much lobby driven.
So it's very vindictive what Trump is doing. And as you said earlier, it's a deliberate attempt to try and break India's back, to break India's resolve.
Yes, of course. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because America has a lot to gain in maintaining friendly ties with India, as we have a lot to gain if we are able to do so. So I don't see what his calculation is, and I think he's totally excluding the fact that this will leave a lasting damage on the attitudes that the Indian public and the policymakers will have with regard to how deep they should deepen, how much they should go ahead and deepen their ties with the United States. The trust factor has been hit very hard, and we'll have to think immediately. We can't delink ourselves from the United States, but there will be, I think, policy choices which will have in mind that we must not over rely on the United States.
Against that background, then, Kanwal Sibal, let me ask you what I believe for many is the critical question: how should India respond? Trump is clearly, as you've established, bullying India. Do we keep quiet and submit in the hope that things will sort themselves out? As you said, Trump is mercurial. He can change his mind. Who knows? If he's reached a deal with Putin, all of this will be pushed into the background. Or should we resist and retaliate, as many believe the Chinese successfully did, as many believe that the Brazilians are doing? Which of the two would you recommend?
No, I would say that at the level of the government, we should keep our doors of dialogue open. As you know, a US trade delegation led by their deputy USTR is coming this month to India. We should continue the trade talks, and we should say that we are willing to have a mutually beneficial, balanced, and a fair trade agreement. And we made some progress, and we are willing to make more progress. But there are no-go areas on which we will not yield, come what may. And therefore, the Americans have to accept that. And the rhetoric at the level of our government should be measured. But our media, our civil society, our international relations expert, they should let America have it. That they should know that the public opinion is highly agitated. And if we can, the government should actually leverage India's public opinion to send a message to the American policymakers through their embassy here, through the Western media, that the United States is losing a lot of ground in India with the Indian public. In a democratic country, this is very important.
But you're making a very important distinction, if I've understood you correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong. The government should use public opinion, the media, policy experts, as you said, to hit America hard. But the government itself should keep the door open, go ahead with the negotiations that are intended or planned for the end of this month. And you're also, I take it, suggesting that we should not retaliate by jacking up our own tariffs against American goods in the interim. You're not suggesting that?
In the interim, no. We have to see how it pans out, because the trade negotiations are not over. If at the end of whatever round of discussions that we plan to have, if we find that there is a total block and we can't move further, then yes, as you know, we've already alerted the WTO, not that it matters very much, that on steel and aluminum tariffs, we're going to raise this. Now, we can raise our concerns because what Trump has done is totally violative of the WTO, but that's not going anywhere. The whole policy of American policy of tariffs is totally in violation of the WTO.
Forgive me interrupting. You're saying a very important thing. Voices like Shashi Tharoor have publicly said this morning that India should jack up tariffs and retaliate in response. You're saying, no, that's not the time.
At this point, no. At this point, no, because the last has not been said. And we don't know what will happen in negotiations with Russia. We will not, we cannot judge at this point whether after redoing their sums in the United States, seeing what the reaction of the government is and how tough our response is. And Prime Minister's own message this morning that he's not going to yield on the interests of the farmers and the dairies and our dairy people and our fishermen and all that. Once that is driven home and there is some rethink on the American side, maybe things will change. If not, then we will see what we can do. We will have to react. Maybe we can draw down, we can back off on some of the negotiations that are taking place on the defense side, reduce our defense dependence on the United States of America. And there is this whole issue of the digital tax. which is a very sensitive issue for the Americans, because all these big American companies are not paying any tax in India. And digital tax is a very sensitive issue for Trump himself. But this will be actually then looking for a confrontation with the United States. That time has not yet come.
But let me put this to you. If, and there's a big if there, if the time does come for India in some way to retaliate, do we have a disadvantage in the sense that we don't have the leverage that China does? We don't have rare earth minerals, magnets, and metals which America desperately needs and cannot get unless China provides them. We don't have that leverage. So, does it make it difficult for us to retaliate? Or do we need to be astute and thoughtful about how we do so? Are there other ways of
Yes, I think so. We have to be astute and thoughtful. That is the whole, that's the responsibility of the government. I mean, if Trump is mercurial and he's unpredictable and he has no sense of geopolitics, doesn't mean that we have to reduce ourselves to that level. We have to think in the medium and longer term and fashion our policy accordingly. We shouldn't get into a slanging match with this man. I mean, he's totally irrational. So we should be careful in what we do, keeping our longer term interests in mind. But at some stage, we have to take some action to show our displeasure, though I agree that the cost will be heavy for us. But there is the other thing about the American high tech. I think they very badly need India in order to retain their global supremacy. It's not as if it's cost-free for the American side. But let me add one point, which is I have on good authority that the American corporate sector is still very interested in investing in India. They want to come in India. They're not like Trump. They understand India's importance. Now, whether we can leverage that corporate sector, currently it is being totally bullied by Trump. But whether we can leverage them, especially after the midterm elections next year, if hopefully Trump, the Republicans lose the House, whether we can leverage them to put some pressure on the White House to be more sensible.
But you're suggesting that we may have to wait till the midterm elections next year, which is a year and a half away almost.
Well, I'm saying that in the meantime, a lot of water will flow under the bridge and we'll have to react as events develop. But what I'm saying is that there will be a time when Trump could be weakened within his own country. And therefore, his ability to pressure us and others would be reduced. And that would be the time for us, for the other lobbies in the United States to come forward and tell the White House of the key importance of maintaining good ties with India for the economic reasons, political reasons, defense reasons, and geopolitical reasons.
Let me put to you the piquant dilemma that New Delhi faces today. On the one hand, we definitely need to find a way of coming back into Trump's favor. And that probably means in the interim that we need to either reduce the Russian oil we buy or perhaps scrap it altogether. On the other hand, India also has to defend and nurture and protect its relationship with Russia. Apart from oil, it's a major arms supplier and a long-standing traditional supporter of India's position on Kashmir. But the problem is we can't do both at the same time.
Yes, we can. We've done it before. We've been doing it all along. I mean, it's only now that Trump has made such a big issue of our buying Russian oil. The previous US administration, on the contrary, as you pointed out, and as I know, actually encouraged us to buy Russian oil.
So, but it's the now I'm talking about. Now with Trump, yes, to play both horses is very difficult.
For the time being, it may be difficult, but we are not going to step back from buying Russian oil. There's no way. Now, look, the only relationship today with the big powers where we have stability and a confidence and trust is with Russia. With China, we have a huge problem. Now with the United States, we're having a problem. Now we're not going to put ourselves in a position where actually we lose the sympathy and support even of Russia. Russia, in fact, has become even more important for us. And therefore, we should maintain our ties. And mind you, if Russia also followed the same logic as Americans are saying, that you are cozying up too much to the Americans and you're making your foreign policy towards us subservient to Trump's wishes, then they have also instruments at their hands in order to pressure us. Why should we put ourselves in that situation?
Tell me, in these circumstances that prevail today, How likely is it that Trump will attend the Quad Summit in Delhi, which is scheduled for later this year? And if he doesn't come, because already the New York Times and others are speculating whether he will come or not. If he doesn't come, where does that leave Quad? And where does that leave Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy, which is of great interest to us, or at least it used to be in Biden's time?
Firstly, I don't think this Quad Summit is going to take place. I can't see, after all that has happened, Trump coming to India and being welcomed in India. I don't think he will come. And the summit, to my mind, will have to be postponed. And certainly, Quad has taken a big hit because without United States putting its entire weight behind it, it has no meaning. Now, there is also the possibility of a deal between US and China. And if they strike a deal, and to that extent, therefore, while it'll continue to put pressure on China because of Taiwan and everything else, Quad really then loses a lot of its sense as Quad. But that doesn't mean that we can't cooperate more with Japan and with Australia. But coming back to the question you asked, I personally feel that the Quad summit in these circumstances cannot take place, and Trump cannot visit India.
My last question. I know that you believe we need to give this time to play out, to see what happens with Russia, to see what happens with China, to see whether Trump changes his mind, and he's very prone to change his mind. But that apart, do you see the situation improving during the next 3.5 years of Trump's presidency? Or do you fear that what started badly is going to steadily deteriorate?
Difficult to say, but I would say that going back to the kind of level of confidence and personal bonhomie and personal equation that Prime Minister had with Trump, and the general feeling in India that despite his idiosyncrasies, Trump was good for India, better for India than Biden was. I think that phase is over. That phase is over, and we'll have a difficult relationship. One doesn't know if Trump gets weakened, whether he'll become even more unpredictable and more rash in his thinking and policies. So the jury is out, but I would generally agree that the next 3.5 years are not going to be easy for us.
Kanwal Sibal, thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.